Hey, Deflating Atheism here, and I am continuing my week of kind of introducing you to some new YouTube people around here. So today I have My Two Cents, the YouTube channel My Two Cents. So introduce yourself to us, and please tell us a little bit about your channel.
Hey everybody, my name's My Two Cents. I have a YouTube channel where pretty much I give you my 2 cents, as the name would suggest, mostly on current events and political issues, coming from a libertarian perspective. But I am also a Christian, and I very much enjoy discussing the existence of God. I found Deflating Atheism's channel shortly after I started my own. I have one video on my channel where I kind of talk about some of my frustrations with discussing the existence of God with people. That was one of my earlier videos. Quality's not so great. Maybe down the road I'll kind of remake it for better quality. But if you are interested in, just hearing commentary about what's going on in the world, and well, I don't explicitly address my views as a Christian, or even more broadly as a theist. I do believe your beliefs about those things do tend to have a pretty profound impact on just about everything else. And people who are fond of discussing current events and political issues usually also turn out to be very fond of discussing, ultimate issues. Does God exist? Things like that, whether they're coming from a theist or an atheist perspective.
Yes, yes. And I feel I should add the boilerplate disclaimer here that the views expressed here do not necessarily reflect those of Deflating Atheism. So,
Of course, I'm here to give you my views. I'll discuss my views with Deflating Atheism, but then that's not necessarily him endorsing everything found on my channel. So,
well, again, speaking for myself, since the election, I really have not been bitten by the bug to talk about politics because it seems like everyone's doing it. And there's so many sore feelings. I don't feel the need to rub salt in anyone's wounds, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of backed away from politics a little in not only Deflating Atheism, but just in everything.
Mm-hmm. And to be perfectly honest, I wish I didn't have to talk about it so much. Why I got into starting my channel is the social justice warrior revolution, if you will, is only getting worse, especially on college campuses. And I feel like if we don't speak up, they will just roll over everyone and institute their whole repeal the First Amendment, no free speech. You can only live in an echo chamber of social justice for the rest of your life, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is shocking to me. And I mean, I know people far more educated about it than I will say it's just part and parcel of the whole political correctness movement that's been around for 30 years. Maybe you could draw it back further than that. But it seems like there's been a radical shift just within the last 2 or 3 years. And it seems to, for me, just kind of come out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. And I would say so. I don't think it really came out of nowhere. It's just, and you got to look harder to kind of see where it was coming from. But it's just the way things were already on that trajectory, I'd say, since probably the 60s, even earlier than that. It's just in these past few years, it's really, everything's radically shifted to the left. And I think you can deduce where that came from. It's just because the average person wasn't paying attention for it. It really came as a shock.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a pivot where the liberal policy was, not be racist is to ignore a person's skin color and look at their character. Now it's, to not be racist, you have no excuse for not noticing their skin color. You have to judge everything based on their skin color rather than their character. So various things have done a very definitive 180.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, defending free speech as a matter of principle. No, it's like almost opposing free speech. It's like I said, it's really just jarring to me.
Oh yeah, it is, and it makes me want to punch myself in the face just from how crazy it gets sometimes. But
yeah. And there is also kind of this attitude of kind of radical non-judgment that seems to have emerged about 3 years ago. Of course, if you're a Christian, it's always fair game to criticize you. But I'm talking about anyone's lifestyle choice. just got put off the table if a person wants to just be morbidly obese or something. It's like, well, that's okay. You know, if a person wants to get abortions, well, that's always been like, yeah, okay, no, that's off limits to criticize. And so that seems to have gone hand in hand with this kind of radical identity politics, where you can criticize anyone for anything.
Oh yeah, I mean, ironically, say non-judgment is itself a judgment because they're the ones judging the people who disagree with them. But yeah, there's these particular protected identities, and in particular, like I don't feel like I need to draw more attention to this than it already has, but I think it's obvious to anyone who watches mainstream media that if you criticize Islam, you are just the most evil, judgmental person in the world. But if you criticize Christianity or Judaism, I mean, they totally deserve to get criticized. So,
yeah. Well, I've discussed this before. I think my whole channel is dedicated to criticizing new atheism. But I think on one level, it was actually a correction within the left. Because if you remember, in the immediate aftermath of September 11th, the kind of leftist talking point was that these actions were done in response to American foreign policy. It was not a matter of religion. And this was put forward by people who were in no way sympathetic to organized religion. So I remember at the time thinking it seems kind of odd that, you know, these people who don't like organized religion, but they will consciously evade, you know, blaming Islam for these terror attacks. So I think that the kind of Sam Harris strand of new atheism is almost kind of a necessary correction. At least they're consistent. You know, unlike the old guard, I barely even hear those people anymore. I barely even hear the people who say they just hate us because of American foreign policy. I think they've just it's become so ridiculous even to assert that at this point.
Well, I like just one example. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book "The Black Banners Inside Al Qaeda," which was written by a former FBI agent, one of whom was he was one of the primary agents who investigated into the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He records conversations in that book that he had with actual captured Al Qaeda members, and talking to them, you know, it was. Certainly, I don't want to paint a broad brush and say that all Muslims are violent terrorists. That's certainly not true. But at least these ones, absolutely, it was about religion for them. For listening to what they had to say from their own mouths. Yes, this was a religiously motivated thing. You can not like that, but that is why they did it. So,
there seems to be an odd symbiosis between atheism and Islam. It's that like ISIS. Thank God ISIS seems to be on the wane. I mean, they seem to be on their last legs. Thank God. But ISIS kind of creates the perfect propaganda for atheism. I mean, radical Islam in general creates kind of the perfect propaganda for atheism, and atheism in turn kind of creates the perfect spiritual void for radical Islam to flourish. And they kind of form the symbiosis. That's kind of the perfect storm for the complete cannibalization of Western culture.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're partners in as much as they both want to destroy Western culture. I feel like if they ever succeed, they'll turn on each other. But for the time being, they're allies because they both despise Western culture.
Yes. There was somebody phrased, I wish I could remember who wrote this, but they say liberals are blind to the spiritual world, and Islam is completely blind to the political world, and so they're just kind of blind to each other. So liberals can't even comprehend the evil of this radical Islam. That's also another thing I want to say as a disclaimer. I'm not jumping aboard the anti-Islam bandwagon. If you want a guy to say Islam is cancer, that's not me.
Okay, me neither. You know, I have had friendly conversations with people who are Muslims who do not adhere to radical Islam. Now, whether or not radical Islam is the logical outworking of what Muhammad himself taught, that's a discussion worth having. But it certainly wouldn't be fair to just say, you know, all Muslims are radically violent. That's demonstrably false.
Yes. So yes, let's get back to talking about what what your channel is about and what caused you to create your channel. Well, first off, tell us a little bit about yourself without doxing yourself here.
Okay, yes. Well, just to tell you a little bit about myself, well, I am a freedom-loving American who has some very strong opinions. One of the reasons I started my channel is some of my friends told me, I'm the kind of person who I will talk your ear off about whatever's on my mind. And I recall a friend of mine saying, why don't you spew your thoughts to someone who actually cares? So I said to myself, you know what, that's good advice. And a couple days later, I started my YouTube channel. So as I said, those first two videos weren't that great, but I've since gotten some better video editing software. I have just a little bit about myself. I have an undergraduate degree in engineering. Currently working on a master's in criminal justice, and I work in the security field, but that is all the more I will say about myself.
Excellent. This is like the third time I've done a hangout and realized I'm just like in way over my head with people who are more knowledgeable than me. It seems to be a matter of course for me, yes. But yes, and so so your friend told you to spew your thoughts to someone who cares, and just that pejorative word "spew" tells you how his degree of interest.
Yes.
But yes, and so you don't really discuss religion that much. But we were talking before we went live about kind of your experiences with discussing with atheists and why you don't do it so much anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do really, I am a Christian, and one thing I do love to discuss why I'm a Christian, why I believe in God. It's something that I like to do a lot in person. It's not something I so much do on the internet anymore. And I would say the reason for that is I want to make a disclaimer here. I know inevitably there are going to be some comments on this claiming you're misrepresenting atheists. Okay, so yes, I understand you can't loop all atheists into one group. This doesn't represent every atheist out there. But I have found more and more the people who identify as atheists or agnostics who want to have discussions on the internet tend to be, the mindset they have is basically this. If you are an atheist, you are rational and you are a genius. If you are not an atheist, you must be incredibly stupid. And there's really no in between for them. I mean, in their mind, there is fundamentally, or at least the way they seem to talk, there's fundamentally no difference between, say, William Lane Craig and the pastor at the Westboro Baptist Church. They're both equally stupid in the reasons they have for believing in God. Anyone, I think of, I don't know if you're familiar with Tom Gilson and his website Thinking Christian, but he wrote an article called Internet Atheist once, and he recalls a guy commenting on his website saying, your site's called Thinking Christian. I mean, what a joke. If you were thinking, you'd be an atheist. And I found that if you try to engage such a person, generally the conversation goes nowhere because they're so convinced they've already decided you're stupid. You have no good reasons for believing what you do. Anything you say just goes right over their head. And I don't terribly have any interest in engaging in conversations like that anymore. If you've already decided I'm dumb and you're not gonna, anything I say is just gonna go right over your head. I mean, who are we helping in having that kind of a conversation?
Yeah, well, as I said before, I think the entire new atheism movement is basically a monument to the Dunning-Kruger effect. These people so vastly overestimate their intellectual competence, and that's actually an indictment of their confidence. The fact that they have to plaster the words rational and reason over everything they're associated with is incredibly self-sabotaging when you consider it in light of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's ironic because what always comes to mind is there's a quote, ironically, from Sam Harris's book, The Moral Landscape. But Sam Harris said, the less competent a person is in a given domain, the more they will tend to overestimate their abilities. Yes. And this often leads to a ugly marriage of confidence and ignorance that is difficult to correct for. And I say, yeah, he is absolutely right on that point.
Yes, the doctor heal thyself, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, when you were talking about, like, if you were thinking you'd be a Christian, I'm sure you know this as well, probably why the Thinking Christian was created is because there's a YouTube channel called The Thinking Atheist. I just learned recently it's Seth Andrews, and that goes into Seth Andrews figures into certain recent events we want to discuss. But yeah, I remember like the year, like before I even had my channel, I was listening to a thinking atheist little hangout. And you know, the guy says, well, if you're the thinking atheist, we just assume, you know, if you're an atheist that you're thinking. And that, like, my palm went right through my forehead. It's like, even if you assume that atheism is the rational choice, which for the sake of argument, we'll let that slide. It doesn't mean that nobody's an atheist because of stupid reasons. I mean, you can have a stupid reason to adopt any belief. So
Yeah,
it doesn't even follow logically that if you're an atheist, therefore you're thinking, even if we assume that there is a valid thought process that leads to atheism, yes.
And I actually made a short video. It's one of my older ones, so not as higher quality, but I called it the difference between being right and being rational. And the example I used was the astronomer Ptolemy, and who taught a geocentric model of the solar system. And a point I made was, in Ptolemy's day, Ptolemy was wrong. The sun does not revolve around the Earth, but I don't think he was irrational. I mean, he made his judgments based on the best information he had at the time, and to this day, planetariums use his model to simulate the solar system just in their simulations. So yeah, he was wrong, but it doesn't mean he was irrational. On the other hand, I said if you have a little kid who believes that the Earth revolves around the sun, and he believes that because a leprechaun under his bed told him that the Earth revolves around the sun, well, he's right. The Earth does revolve around the sun, but that doesn't mean that his reason for believing it is rational. So.
Exactly, and it goes into how people misunderstand the whole Galileo dealie. Is that this was not a blind faith versus science? Is the exact wrong way to consider the issue.
Yeah, Galileo was opposing the scientific authorities of his day.
Well, yeah, well, I think Copernicus was kind of almost just speculation at that point. But what they thought that the Ptolemaic system was based on good evidence.
Yes.
So it turns out that they were not correct. But you can't cast the entire debate in terms of religion, of just kind of this blind faith and scriptural authority, because Ptolemaic cosmology has nothing to do with the Bible. It didn't come from the Bible at all.
Yes, and what's funny is that this whole notion, a lot of atheists are more than willing to say, if you believe in God, you're stupid. It's that simple. I mean, do you realize how many of history's greatest minds you just called stupid by saying believing in God makes you stupid? I mean, so you're saying Isaac Newton, Blaise Pascal. I mean, heck, even Aristotle believes in an unmoved first mover. So
yeah. And meanwhile, every kiddie with his own gaming channel is the intellectual superior to all of them. Yes,
exactly.
I got a response to one of my videos. It's not even worth a response on my half, but it's from a YouTube channel called The Geek Room. A big surprise. They're just like dogmatic atheists. And they like review my channel, and they're just like shocked that I would even presume to contradict anything the cosmic skeptic says. Like to them, like cosmic skeptic is like Thomas Aquinas.
Oh yeah.
They were just like, this guy's actually contradicting something a cosmic skeptic says, and they make a few very facile remarks, and at the end they just say in response to my video, yeah, stop commenting on stuff you know nothing about. So yeah, these gamers totally know like philosophy. They've just got that all down pat, and they're just like, to me, don't presume to speak on subjects you know nothing about. But my channel I've had for 2 years that discusses philosophy and God and theology. Yes. But yeah, so I mean, I get upset with things like that. But they're intellectual worlds. Like I said with Drew Skillness, the thing that galls me is not the ignorance, it's the incuriosity. And the fact that their intellectual worlds are so small that they will take the most facile answer and just think that solves the matter once and for all time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, how many times I've certainly had this happen to me, and I'm sure it's happened to you, where you leave a comment on some kind of atheist comment, and you're not looking to insult them or nothing. You're just trying to pose a counter argument, and they respond by saying every argument for the existence of God has been debunked, and then they leave a link to some atheist website just saying like, okay, go to this website and you'll learn how the past 3,000 years of theology and philosophers have all been refuted in this one website.
They don't understand how ideas work.
Mhm.
They think like if somebody says that something is wrong, that just settles the matter. Apparently, it's been debunked. Someone on the internet says it's like, yeah, well, you can go on YouTube and find people who debunk the moon landing. I mean,
Yeah, or perhaps something, a claim that is incredibly popular among atheist channels. Not to jump into this too much, but the notion there is no historic figure, Jesus Christ. The story is copied from Osiris or Horus or Mithras, or these ancient pagan mythologies were basically copied. There is no historic Jesus, and it's a popular claim among the internet atheist community. Yet there's actually a clip of Dr. Bart Ehrman, who is certainly no friend of Christianity, who is, in fact, he's receiving a reward from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and someone in the audience asks him why he believes in Jesus, because she says, I've never seen any evidence for the historical Jesus. And you see the look on his face. He's trying to be respectful to her, but he just says, look, there is no accredited scholar in the entire Western world who thinks that there was no historical Jesus. And, I respect your disbelief, but I think atheists have done themselves a huge disservice by jumping on the bandwagon with this, because it really just makes you look foolish to the rest of the world. And now that is coming from a scholar who is no friend of Christianity. So
the thing is that they are willing to die on that hill, and it shocks me because it's so unnecessary even to be an atheist to say that Jesus never existed, but they will go there. And it almost feels like someone's poisoning the well. Kind of like when they call the Bible Bronze Age fairy tales, when the Bronze Age ended 1,200 years before the Gospels were written.
yes.
It feels like someone was poisoning the well to discredit the entire movement, but they were too dumb to realize that the well had been poisoned, so they just run with it for all eternity.
Yeah.
But yes. So, what were we talking about?
I guess we're talking about dialogues with skeptics in particular. So I guess that's kind of been my experience. And like I said, to be fair, I have had some great conversations with atheists. I actually in 2012 the Reason Rally in Washington D.C. I actually went there with some of my friends and talked to probably more atheists in that one day than I have over the rest of my life combined.
Yes.
But just a quick note about the Reason Rally. What I thought was funny about that is, for a rally that was supposed to be about reason, most of the speakers were comedians. And even when Richard Dawkins spoke, he's obviously one of the four horsemen of the new atheism, he gave a short speech in which his message was essentially ridicule religious people, ridicule them at every turn. And and that's what a lot of people did that day. Now, to be fair, there were some people there who, I said, hey, you want to have a discussion about, why you're an atheist, and I'll tell you why I believe in God. And, even if, we probably won't change each other's minds, but at least at the end, we can shake each other's hands and say we understand each other better. And there were a few people willing to do that. But the kind of distinguishing factor I found is, so a common claim, why are you an atheist? Probably 90% will say because there's no evidence that God exists. So the follow-up question I asked was, okay, can you give me an example of something that, if it existed, you would consider evidence that God exists? And about 90% of the time, from that moment, it immediately devolved into calling me stupid, you're an idiot, go away. But at least the 10% or so where I had a respectful conversation, they were at least willing to offer something, and then that kind of gave me somewhere to go with the conversation. So,
yes. Well, that's the thing. There is no evidence for God as an article of faith, and no matter what, even if you don't like the Christian articles of faith, at least they can be defended in principle. I don't see how you could even defend that there is no evidence for God, even in principle. You would have to do, unless you have some a priori reason to believe that there's no evidence for God, you have to do some sort of exhaustive search of every possible reason there is to think God exists, and then somehow refute every one of them conclusively. It's not possible.
Yes, so, and I think it's if you consider any court case in a court of law, I don't think there's any defendant who has either no evidence against him or no evidence for him. I mean, in every case, there's evidence that could go either way. It's the question of what is the best explanation given all the evidence. I mean, in a murder. In a murder trial, suppose there's the police recover from a crime scene a knife that has the fingerprints of the defendant on it. That's a piece of evidence.
Yep.
Does that definitively say he's the killer? No, not necessarily. He could have been framed, but it's still a piece of evidence. So,
like I said, I mean, it's so unnecessary to be an atheist to make this claim, to make this outrageous claim that there's no evidence for God, and yet they do it. I mean, they just have to double down. Basically, there's no going back when you assert that you are the kind of rational and reasonable exemplars. There's no going back. What are you going to say? Oh, I'm rational, but I was irrational there. No, I mean, ironically, their conviction that they have this unique ability to change their minds with evidence, and that they are purely rational, is what actually compels them not to ever change their minds in light of new evidence.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I like to ask that question. Okay, can you give me an example of something that, like, tell me what a piece of evidence for God would look like? You know, you say there's no evidence. Okay, fair enough. But tell me what would be evidence? Like something, if it exists, like I don't believe unicorns exist, but if I found a fossilized unicorn, I might be inclined to think unicorns existed at one point. I don't think that evidence exists, but if it existed, it would be evidence for the existence of unicorns. Like at least if you're going to say there's no evidence, you should be able to offer something that if it existed would be evidence.
Yes.
So.
But when you have they'll say something like, well, God comes down from the heavens and shows himself. Well, then you'd write that off as a hallucination. You write that off as a mass delusion, just as you have with every other miraculous every other miraculous event in history. Mm-hmm. You just write that off as mass delusion or hallucination.
Which then and from there it kind of ends up proving that their assertion that there's no evidence for God is in fact unfalsifiable.
Yes, because unfalsifiable. Yes,
because anything that would turn out to be evidence for God's existence is then explained away. In fact, I had when I was at the Reason rally, one answer I got for what would be evidence that God existed. He said, unless God simultaneously reveals himself to and communicates with every person on the planet at once, I will not believe God exists. Because if God appeared to me, it would be more likely that was a hallucination. So the only way I could disprove that would be if he appeared to everyone and gave us all some kind of unique message, and then I could confirm with everyone else that they all got the same message, and then that would be proof God existed. And
there's an obvious flaw there.
Yes.
What if other people telling you that they had the same thing is in turn just a hallucination on your part?
Yeah, exactly. So
it's very spongy logic. Yeah. Oh man, this goes into so much. Yeah. What I was talking about with missing the mark is that the kind of dogmatic materialist always seem to believe that experiential reality is not as legitimate as the kind of materialist explanation. They always the experiential phenomenal reality is always given lesser priority than the naturalistic account. So I mean, when they say something like love is just chemicals in the brain, it's already like subsidiary to the naturalistic phenomenon, of which it's merely a correlate. You can't say that it is, but that's going into something else.
Yeah, going into something else. But yeah, ironically there, I mean, the last dogmatic materialist I spoke to, I remember asking him, well, since you are a dogmatic materialist, space, time, matter, energy, that's all that exists, you would have to say that my irrational belief in God is the result of the matter in my brain essentially tricking the other matter in my brain into believing in God.
Yeah.
And he said yes. So I said, so you would agree that the matter in my brain makes me believe in God? And he said, yes, I do believe that. And I said, okay, so you would concede that the matter in your brain makes you believe that God does not exist? And he said, yes. So really, this turns out to be the matter in my brain is tricking me into believing something false. Well, you happen to be lucky enough to have the matter in your brain convince you of something true, but neither of us really can judge either way, since it's just the matter in our brain making us believe.
And the irony is that this materialist view makes a mockery of every single virtue atheists attribute to themselves. the
Mm-hmm.
supposed courageousness that they have in casting off the shackles of religious doctrines. There is no courageousness. It's just chemicals, and you have no choice. It's the illusion of courageousness to take this step. Reason, logic, forming, logical beliefs. No, again, it's just blind matter, giving you the illusion that you have any choice, that you're doing it of any will. So the whole thing just empties out all virtue that atheists would apply to themselves. And I don't know if you saw, apparently I'm the only guy who's seen them, but they have these trailers on Facebook. Oh, you don't even do Facebook, do you?
I had a Facebook shortly, and I got Zucker punched because I posted some anti-SJW stuff, and my account was suspended for, offensive content. So
that's a nice opinion you have there. It would be a shame if someone removed it.
Yes.
But yes. What was I gonna say? Yes. You don't do Facebook, but Sam Harris has this trailer for his Waking Up website that kind of goes with his book. But he's trying to make basically new atheism and try to make it like a self-help quasi new age thing. It's kind of hard to explain. But when you watch the trailer, it's like this like inspiring music with these sunsets and a baby's eyes open, and he gives these kind of platitudes over it, where he talks, we don't need the myths of the past. Well, first I'll prove it's a myth, but that's besides the point. We don't need the myths and fables of the past to enjoy the spectacular cosmos. I have so many problems with that. But yeah, Sam Harris, why don't you just come out and tell your viewers over those sunsets and the baby's eyes, free will is an illusion. You're just an automaton.
Yes, and if I have read his book Free Will. So
yeah, put that forward. Have that as your selling point. See how many fish you catch with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, as I recall, in his book Free Will, he admitted that people who are taught that free will is an illusion tend to cheat, steal, and otherwise do things far more often.
And they become much more pliant and much more suggestible, which I mean, there's been studies about this. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing is that atheists are the revolutionaries. They're the iconoclasts. They're throwing off the shackles. They want to change the order. No, the materialist view is imprisoning. And when people have this idea that their actions are determined, they become very suggestible. They become very pliant. It is the perfect ideology for tyranny.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing, I've heard plenty of atheists say, when you ask the question, why do you spend so much time trying to convince everyone else to be atheists? They say, well, because the world would be such a better place if there were more atheists.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's true. Certainly beliefs affect how you behave, but the particular, just the belief that God does not exist, it's not clear to me that in particular about how you should live follows from that. And to give an example, so here are two historical atheists, Ayn Rand and Joseph Stalin. Now, if you ideologically, those two are on far opposite sides of the spectrum. The only thing they have in common is they don't believe in God. But clearly, their lack of belief in God could not have been the factor that drove them to their political or economic views, because they're so radically different. So it's not clear to me that if you just suddenly everyone stopped believing in God, they would all, adopt this great new way of living that.
Yes. Well, that's the irony of quote unquote free thought, is that they assume that all people who think for themselves must necessarily arrive at the same conclusions. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, if I think for myself, I can arrive at any conclusion I damn well please. That's the entire meaning of what free thought is.
Yes.
But yeah, what I like with the determinists is that they'll say, "Oh, well, I have some higher purpose because I think it is because of my belief in determinism that I believe that getting these ideas out there will make the world a better place. So I'm determining other people's thoughts." Well, it's like, okay, you could take the hindsight view. Yeah, I could go out there and try to spread the gospel of determinism, or I could sit on my couch and watch TV all day. At the end of the day, when I just sat on the couch watching TV all day, I could justify to myself by saying it can't have been different. There's no other possible way it could have turned out. So it becomes a perfect justification for inaction.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it is so ironic. It makes such a mockery of every virtue that atheists espouse, and kind of like the SJWs. I mean, it's. I was talking to Missing the Mark. I feel like I'm talking a lot here. I feel like I should be letting you talk more. But there's a great quote in Dostoevsky's "The Demons" or "The Possessed," however you want to translate the title. But where the character Stavrogan, however you pronounce his name, he says, I began with a plan for ultimate freedom, and I ended with a plan for ultimate tyranny. But I assure you that my argument was logical every step of the way. I feel like those paradoxes are everywhere in both leftism and atheism these days.
Mm-hmm.
Is that they completely turn against their own founding principles, but still think that it's the kind of the logical expression of it.
Well, yeah, and certainly the social justice warrior is the perfect example, because for the social justice warrior, racism is the greatest evil that you could ever have. To be racist is, I mean, their favorite term. They say you're a neo-Nazi. Anybody who disagrees, you're a neo-Nazi. You're you're a racist. You're you're a fascist. Yet it ends up being the social justice warriors who are saying, if you're white, you are not allowed to have an opinion because white people shouldn't have opinions. It's the social justice warriors that are advocating for blacks only graduation ceremonies because they deserve to have their own graduation ceremonies. Was a racial segregation kind of the thing we wanted to get rid of back in the 1960s, and now we're bringing it back? I mean, it's just they end up being the very racist that they end up, all they can do is judge people based on their race, the very thing that they're supposedly trying to put an end to.
Well, this is what's apparent to me, is that for Black Lives Matter and for the SJWs, their advocacy is not born out of any sort of concern for black people.
Oh, definitely not.
It's all a sham. What their objective is to shake the entire foundation of society, and they will grab onto any grievance and try to jostle that as much as possible to shake the foundations of society. Has anyone who has been stuck in a traffic jam at a Black Lives Matter highway brigade, have they ever emerged from that experience less racist than they were before?
I seriously doubt it.
No. What they're doing is that they are purposefully trying to stoke the fires of racial grievance, which is not going to be a better existence for anyone.
Oh.
Now, obviously, coming from where I am, I believe that the best prescription for racial harmony comes from the Christian faith. I believe it's done more than anything else to promote racial harmony for various reasons. They're trying to exploit racial grievance, and it's no mistake that the puppet master at the top of it, George Soros, is a very rich man very white, who is secluded in his very affluent part of North Shore, Long Island. He's not there with the working class.
No, he looks more like one of the greedy capitalists that they would love to, take down. But
yeah, I mean, like I said, they're not really concerned about the people that they advocate concern for, and I mean, I remember there was a time I considered myself a leftist, a long time ago. Even then, I thought this is gonna sound like arrogant, obviously coming from me. I thought like racism was bad, but I also thought it was a very boring and banal problem. I thought there were like more interesting problems to talk about, but now it's just become this consuming thing. And this also, I'm gonna let you talk. I'm happy for you. I'm gonna let you finish. But wasn't the election of Obama supposed to inaugurate this era of this post-racial era? Wasn't that supposed to happen?
Oh, it was supposed to. I believe he promised he would radically transform America.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I think America was radically transformed, but I'd have to say, growing up as a kid, I remember when I was in grade school, I thought that racism was a thing of the past. And, I was a kid. I didn't know much about what was going on. But it sure seems to me that since the Obama era, racial tensions are far worse than they were when I was a kid. So.
Yes. And there are people whose entire purpose is to stoke the fires. And maybe there are some on the right, but there are a whole hell of a lot on the left.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, what you're saying, we're talking about kind of the kind of fungibility of these kind of leftist convictions. Now, I'm sure you have. Well, I don't know if you've seen this video where they basically tell people like the policies of like Pinochet or something, and then say it came from Che Guevara, and all these college students are like, yeah, I'm totally about that, or they tell like Trump's tax policies and say it comes from Bernie Sanders. And yeah, oh no, I totally agree with that. I think the actual specifics of these social programs, ultimately, it's very confusing to me. They don't actually matter. I think it's more the spirit of the whole thing. Now, you're a libertarian. Like, I can't see exactly what the difference is between anarcho-capitalism and anarcho-socialism, how that would be a different thing in practice. It almost seems like it's just kind of put forward with kind of different spirits, is the best way you can put it. So I'm a lot of times I'm not even sure what's being argued about,
Okay. You're saying for you, it's not clear what the difference would be between anarcho-capitalism and anarcho-socialism?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll have to disagree with you there, although I don't want to take too much time talking about that. But essentially, anarcho-capitalism, obviously, many would attribute that to the philosophy of Murray Rothbard. But essentially, anarcho-capitalism would be the view that the free market produces the best quality products when it comes to the standard argument for capitalism as an economic system is that the highest quality products come out of capitalism because businesses compete with one another, and only the business that produces the highest quality product for the lowest possible price succeeds.
Yeah.
Government services, on the other hand, cannot fail because they're funded through taxes. So anarcho-capitalism would be the view that if the free market produces better goods and services, then why wouldn't they produce better police, courts, and like other services traditionally presented by government? So anarcho-socialism, on the other hand,
I said anarcho-communism, by the way, but yes.
Okay. So you said difference between anarcho-socialism and anarcho-communism,
Yeah.
or but I'm sorry.
Because they're both anarchic. I mean, so there is no top-down system.
Yeah, in principle, there would be no centralized government. But they would, in principle, they are different in as much as in anarcho-capitalism, it would still be a system based on private ownership and people making voluntary transactions. Anarcho-socialism or anarcho-communism would be essentially a society where there's collective ownership of everything, but and everyone takes as much as they need, except I would argue human nature makes that impossible. Now, some would say there are those that would argue that anarcho-capitalism could not be sustained. A government would kind of naturally emerge. And certainly that's an argument to be had. I think it's more than we can get into here. But I would say the difference between those two is still in principle. Anarcho-capitalism would be grounded in the libertarian principle that every person is responsible for their own actions. You are free to do whatever you'd like with your own time and resources, but you cannot initiate force against others in order to get what you want. Whereas anarcho-communism would be there is no self-ownership, there's only collective ownership. And an ideal world where no one is selfish and everyone only takes just what they need and does everything for the better of everyone else, then yeah, that would work. But I think human nature shows that's just not something that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, even in the Marxist view, the kind of apparatus of the state would just kind of wither away like a vestigial organ, according to his theory.
According to his theory.
Communism would just be self-sustaining,
Mm-hmm. Well, I think history shows that may have been Marx's philosophy, but in practice,
well, he was wrong about everything. I mean,
yes.
But well, maybe not. Maybe there's like a little sliver, but basically, all his historical predictions did not pan out, which makes it uproarious to me that Marxism still hobbles along as a valid ideology. I mean,
Well, it never worked before, but if we tried it again this time, it'll work.
Yeah, there were, oh my god, there was such a great graphic. It was a little meme graphic. I saw it on Facebook. I wish I saved it because it was so hilarious. It was so perfect. But it was mentioned. It was a graphic of misery versus communism, and so it's like socialism to communism to real communism, and so the misery index goes up with socialism to communism, and then it goes to real communism in quotation marks, and the misery goes right down. It's like, yeah, that's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
The more communistic societies have been, the more miserable they have been. But
Mm-hmm.
talking about principle, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into this, but I mean, in a anarcho-capitalist society, if a arrangement of people want to create a commune, they are free to do so.
Yes, they would be, but they would also reap the consequences.
Society, there's no top-down force compelling people to be in a commune, so that's why I don't understand what the difference is really in practice.
I guess it would be in practice. I would say the difference ends up being in anarcho-communism society would require everyone to denounce. I mean, it would not. Yes, you willingly could form a commune in an anarcho-capitalist society, but in an anarcho-communist society, there could be no private ownership of anything. I mean, I know they
authority. That would require a state. Yeah. It wouldn't really be anarcho-communist.
Yeah, yes, which is why I would argue communism does require a state, because in order to enforce, I think people intuitively, the concept of private property is so deeply ingrained in what it means to be human that it's not something that can be instituted without the exercise of force.
Yes.
And I would say, do I identify myself as an anarcho-capitalist? Yes, I do, because I would say I do believe that capitalism, when it comes to economic systems that work, I firmly renounce the idea of utopia. There is no such thing on Earth. No society would be perfect. Now, do I think there will ever be a utopian anarcho-capitalist society? No, I don't. But I do think that that is the political philosophy I would move towards. If you ask me what are the problems with our economy today, I would say the problem is too much government intervention, not enough free market capitalism. So even if we never achieve anarcho-capitalism, it is my goal to do what I can to try and influence a move towards less government, more free markets.
Yes, I'm gonna float something by you here.
Okay.
In my opinion, do you find that people who are atheistic are overly attached to kind of ideological purity, and so you get more atheists on either end of the spectrum? Because I think like extreme libertarianism and extreme like communism are both born of this ideology that there are these perfect kind of self-sustaining systems that can be established.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, sorry, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think that's an excellent point, in as much as, like I said, I like the idea of anarcho-capitalism, but at the same time, I acknowledge there is no such thing as utopia. Human nature dictates that there will never be a anarcho-capitalist society that functions perfectly, any more than there would be a communist society. But yes, there are, ironically, I would say there are a great many anarcho-capitalists who are atheists, but at the same time, there are a great many communists who are atheists, which is why I said it kind of discounts in my mind that the people who say the world would be a better place just if there were more atheists. I think that alone disproves that, because if you've got so many atheists on the right and on the left, it certainly doesn't seem to me that everybody becoming an atheist would necessarily make any particular belief system follow. But yes, there's also, if there is no God, to whom everyone is, humanity is essentially, well, I know there really is no good or bad, but there's certainly no belief in humanity being depraved or sinful, then why doesn't it make sense that eventually humanity could create utopia, however that would look?
Exactly. I mean, I think it's taking account of human fallenness, which Christianity gives us, which kind of makes possible a pragmatic ethos that I think this country was founded on. And it's like we realize that nothing's perfect. Let's just kind of stick with what works and make a few tweaks here and there. I really think that if America has a governing philosophy, it comes from the philosophies of basically pragmatism.
And I would say, some people ask me, there are those that would say a Christian cannot be a libertarian, and they make their arguments why. So some have asked me to say, why are you a Christian and a libertarian? I would say because, just to give an example, 1 Corinthians 5, Paul tells the church that not to judge believers, not to judge unbelievers. Obviously within the church, if you see your brother living in sin, then you call him out. If you see an unbeliever living in sin, God will judge him for that. I believe, so my view is this, at least from a political standpoint, I think every person, provided you are not hurting anyone else, you are free to make your own decisions and choose what you want to do with your own time and resources. And if you choose to do something that I would say is sinful, that's your business. I believe someday you will answer to God for that. You do not need to answer to me for that.
Yes. Again, at risk of alienating some of my viewers, I chafe very much when Christians say, I'm not going to get into the discussion that you must vote for candidates who oppose gay marriage. It's like, as Christians, we're not really obligated to do anything with politics.
And as a the issue of marriage in particular, as a libertarian, this is where I depart from any of my conservative friends. But I would say, as the libertarian view of marriage in my mind is, well, as a Christian, I believe the institution of marriage is an inherently religious institution. Yes. And I would say, for a Christian man and woman, if they believe what the Bible teaches about marriage, then they're swearing to stay together till death do us part has nothing to do with a piece of paper from the government. Yes. Now, some would say, the standard conservative argument is that male-female couples are good for society and same-sex couples are bad for society. Therefore, the government should endorse the one and discourage the other. I would say, as a libertarian, my view is this: if that's really true, then people will find out by reaping the consequences of their own actions. So in my opinion, if a man and a man or a woman and a woman want to pledge to stay together till death do us part to one another, that is their business and no concern of mine. And if it's true that those kind of relationships are harmful, they will find out by reaping the consequences of their own actions.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean that's the thing. I really don't like when they think that like Christians are somehow obligated to take on a political position, which is also another reason I don't really touch politics much on this channel, because I don't want people to think that religion is almost part and parcel of a larger ideology. And why I started my channel is because I thought anti-atheism is important enough to be a cause in and of itself. Now I was talking with another guy. We were talking about creating a network of online anti-atheists. I am all for that. I am all for that. There kind of already is kind of a network of anti-atheists, but like making it more like legitimate and giving it a name and giving it like logos and stuff. But then he started like wanting to incorporate politics into it and say, oh well, these are the kind of like official positions of the anti-atheist network. And what it seems to me is like, dude, do you want to create like a polar opposite version of atheism plus? Because I think that's how it's gonna play out. But yeah,
and apart from what I might say, I am fully willing to work with atheists who share my political views to achieve what I believe to be mutually beneficial ends. And as a libertarian, I fully support the right of atheists to trash my religious beliefs. If you hate my religious beliefs and you want to speak out against it, I fully support your right to do that. It's the people I stand against are the ones who want to silence me and tell me I can't express my views. So.
Well, you know what my friend Max Kolbe has to say about the anti-SJWs and the MRAs who are also atheists. He calls them Menshevik atheists. He believes that they're useful idiots who will just be lined up when the whole more kind of socialistic atheism comes to the fore. So he does not hold them in high esteem. because he feels ultimately it's these when you kind of consort with these people who have no respect for your religious beliefs. Well, when it comes down to it, I mean, they're going to choose their atheism over your politics. I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yes. So yes, so I ran out of gas there. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. And I guess we've been going at this for a while, so I did have a few other questions for you, but maybe just kind of to end on.
No, we don't have to. Let's just. Well, what was the other question?
I was end on a different note. I'd be interested to ask you. Obviously, I've seen a lot of your videos. If you amongst those that argue for the existence of God, I do like to, or even against the existence of God. The one question I always love to ask is, if you have only 5 minutes to explain your case for why you believe God exists, how do you personally choose to do it?
Yes, well, my 2 cents actually sent me an email kind of outlining these things we could talk about. We talked about none of them, except for that one thing. That was the question I was really dreading you would ask me, to be quite honest. Because first off, 5 minutes is a very extreme constraint.
Certainly, and I kind of meant it metaphorically when you don't have hours to course through Thomas Aquinas or something like that, but.
And that goes into what I was going to say, because it really depends on who the atheist is and how receptive they are to certain arguments. With dealing with certain people, dealing with a lot of people, particularly those on the atheism thing, particularly people with gamer channels who think that they're experts in religion and philosophy, you probably aren't going to get very far with a philosophical argument. Sad to say. Now, if a person is truly open to new ideas, yeah, you might have a little more luck. But I mean, you can't put all your eggs in the philosophy basket, certainly.
So I would agree. I guess that's I bring that up though because it is kind of a frustration for me, because I believe I find almost all the YouTube videos on the subject of the existence of God focus on the popular level arguments, as made famous by William Lane Craig and others, but the cosmological, the teleological, the moral argument, which I think are
I'm sorry, but I kind of William Lane Craig has academic literature outlining these things, so you can't really trivialize them by calling them popular level arguments.
Oh, certainly, and that's entirely fair. He does, and I cringe every time I hear an atheist say William Lane Craig is an idiot, because it's just like, really?
Yeah.
The man's got 2 PhDs. He's the chair of a school of theology.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a gamer channel. Now, I not to this. That doesn't mean you're wrong, but I think you should exercise a little more humility in how you approach him. But I guess what I have always, when I ask atheists, are you at all familiar with, say, the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas? Almost none of them are.
No.
But what I find, what I've always loved about the philosophical, higher level arguments for the existence of God is, yes, it requires a little bit more thinking. It requires more education than your standard person has. But it's when talking about Big Bang cosmology, or the fact that the universe appears to be physically designed, but for a purpose, people can always make the argument that you're not a scientist, or for all we know, future scientific discoveries will change what we know today. And I don't think those are particularly good objections, but they can be made.
Well, on the other hand, that's naturalism of the gaps. You could just say what you accuse God of the gaps people is exactly what you're doing right now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas when you get to, like, say, the Thomas Aquinas' second way, it's a philosophical argument. But if the premises are true and the argument succeeds, then the argument succeeds regardless of whether or not there are any future discoveries in science or anything like that.
Yes. Also, it pays to remind these people that basically atheists throughout the 19th century basically considered the steady state cosmology of the time as effectively disproving creation accounts in Judeo-Christian faith. So point to them again that yes, the Big Bang theory was first proposed by Georges Lemaitre, who was a the priest, and that was considered devastating for basically the atheistic worldview at the time. Now, for some bizarre reason, atheists have reclaimed the Big Bang Theory as vindication for themselves, which doesn't make any sense at all. But yes, what I was going to say about philosophical arguments is that yes, you need a little philosophical training to approach these things. But I think every philosophical argument for the existence of God has at least some sort of intuitive correlate. So every argument that Aquinas gives, even the more abstruse ones like the contingency arguments and the later formulations, which by the way I think, like for my 5 minutes thing, I think that's the most convincing just for annihilating materialism, in my opinion. But I think all the philosophical arguments have some sort of intuitive correlate where we kind of intuitively recognize the truth in them, even if we can't fully flesh out all the details. So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So
certainly true.
Ultimately, it comes up to the person's willingness to examine these things for themselves, because what's the thing the Bible says? It's like we all aim to win the race, but we only do it at one, which is kind of like a double entendre. We do it as one. We do it on by ourselves, and so that's the thing. It's you could put it out there. Ultimately, it depends on the person's willingness to be convinced, which I don't think a whole lot of atheists are willing to be convinced.
No, and to be fair, there are religious people who aren't willing to be convinced.
Oh, exactly. But, what kind of I kind of regret that I've taken this attitude with a lot of my things is you need to put a chink. Sometimes the best you can hope for is to put a chink in their armor and hope that maybe some months or years down the road, that little fissure will go, and the whole thing will come crashing down. You know, really, because ultimately it's not up to us. You know,
absolutely.
I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up.
Sounds good to me.
What's that?
I said sounds good to me.
I kind of regret. I feel like I've been talking over you the whole time. I feel like I've done the bulk of the talking. But yes,
that's fine. I think it was a good conversation.
Yes, My Two Cents has a very good channel if you're into politics and stuff. So yes, tell us just a little bit about it, and we'll wrap up.
Okay, well, if I guess when this is over, if you could put a link to my channel in the description, that would be great. But on My Two Cents, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I give you my 2 cents about something going on in the world right now. Particularly, as of late, it's been a lot of economics, gun control, and feminism, just because those things are big in the news. But I just today, I put out an argument called "What Really Causes Mass Shootings," and with reference to the situation in Texas, I kind of talked about how I think the mainstream media is only causing more of these things to happen by the way that they talk about it. Some other videos I've done recently, I did one with a YouTuber called Esoteric Entity, where we critiqued the falling rate of profit that Karl Marx talked about. And then I'll have one coming out this Saturday. I think it's going to be about the unless something changes, I'm going to be making one with regards to these swimsuit models in Brazil who wore bikinis made of beef in order to protest sexual harassment. So, I mean, those are the kind of current events, politics, economics, kind of things I report on. But yeah,
look that up.
Yeah, it's all right. Just to give everyone a preview, essentially what happened was that so everyone knows this whole situation with Harvey Weinstein being outed as a sexual assault and all that. I guess a couple models in Brazil said, women are not pieces of meat, and we're sick of women being objectified. So to protest the objectification of women, they wore bikinis made of meat. And I guess the premise, the challenge I'm going to pose in my video is, if I were opposed to robbery and I walked down the streets of inner city Chicago in a coat made of $100 bills, do you think I really would communicate to people that rich people should not be victims of robbery? I'm
Yes.
not saying they're wrong about I certainly think what Harvey Weinstein did is morally reprehensible, but is that really helpful? And that's the question I'm going to be answering. But yeah, every Tuesday I've got uploads every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. So go ahead and check out my channel. And as I say at the end of every one of my videos, that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.
Excellent. You got off on a tear where I had a lot to talk about. Well, I'll let you have that last word. Thank you so much for doing this interview. I thought this was an excellent conversation. So everyone,
thanks for having me on. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
No problem. We certainly will. Everyone go check out My Two Cents' channel. And thank you and have a good night and God bless.
All right. Good night.